Today we will be discussing process costing. In the last few videos we discussed job order costing. I want to start off by comparing job order costing with process costing. With job order costing, each order has the ability to be customized by the customer. We use the example of custom t-shirt orders that could range from 5K participant shirts to shirts for an elementary school class field trip. There's low to medium standardization with job order costing, and each order can be quite different. Because of the customization aspect of job order costing, production volume tends to be relatively low when compared to process costing. The cost object whose cost is calculated as part of job order costing is the job, which is often kept track of on a job cost sheet. For process costing, the product or service sold requires highly repetitive processes, and customization is typically not possible. Typically, the production process is highly standardized. Most products sold in a grocery store would be accounted for using process costing. Take, for example, cartons of orange juice. Although there could be small differences between each carton produced should be identical. Due to the lack of customization in process costing, production volume tends to be relatively high when compared to job order costing. The word process in process costing refers to the different processes or departments that a product must go through before it becomes a finished good. Take the example of orange juice cartons. There might be two departments required to produce a carton of orange juice. First, there would be the juice extraction process. Then there is the packaging process. So for process costing, the cost object is not a job, it's a process, such as the juice extraction or packaging processes. We calculate the cost associated with each department for process costing. For each department in a process costing operation, a process cost summary report will be prepared. The report is a bit lengthy, and we will complete multiple versions from start to finish in subsequent videos. But right now I want to give an overview of why we complete this report and what it contains. The first thing to discuss is this equation. The cost of beginning work in process inventory plus the costs added this period are equal to the cost of units transferred out plus the cost of ending work in process inventory. We call the left-hand side of the equation the costs to account for, which are known, and the right-hand side of the equation the costs accounted for, which are unknown. It's sometimes useful to think in terms of units instead of costs, and the above formula applies to both costs and units. Notice that both sides of the equation describe the total cost of work in process. They are two different ways of describing the same thing. Costs you began with plus costs added this period describe the total work in process. What got transferred out plus what is left over at the end of the period also describes the total work in process. By work in process, I just mean any units that were worked on this period. So this brings us to the problem and the fundamental reason why we complete the process cost summary report. The costs to account for are known costs. Any manufacturer with organized records can tell you the cost of the units they started with and any costs that were added in a particular period. But the costs accounted for are unknown. But we know that they must be equal to the cost to account for. So the question is this: how should the cost to account for be assigned to the cost of units transferred out and the cost of ending work in process inventory? In case you got lost there, let's consider a quick example. Let's say that the costs to account for are $100,000, made up of $40,000 from beginning inventory and $60,000 from costs added that period. We know that the cost accounted for, the right-hand side of the equation, must add up to the $100,000. But how that $100,000 is split between the units transferred and the units in ending work in process inventory is unknown. Should it be $30,000, $70,000? Or maybe $90,000, $10,000? Or split evenly at $50,000, $50,000? That is the goal of the process cost summary, to determine how the costs to account for should be split between the units transferred and the ending work in process inventory. Now you might be thinking, this doesn't sound like that hard of a problem. Since the cost to account for can be expressed in units, let's just find the cost per unit based on the costs and units to account for, which can be applied to the units accounted for. That's actually exactly what we do, but there's one small problem. Not all units are created equally. Consider three scenarios for a unit in our orange juice extraction department example. Case 1. Some oranges went all the way through the juice extraction department in one period. They got squeezed and sent to the next department for packaging. Case 2. Some oranges were already in the juice extraction process at the beginning of the period. Maybe they have been sorted by size, but not yet juiced. Case 3. Some oranges enter the juice extraction department towards the end of the period and end up in ending work in process inventory. Again, some of the work has been put in, maybe they have been sorted, but there is still more work to do. In all three cases, we are dealing with a unit, an orange, or you might think of a unit as the required number of oranges to eventually produce a carton of orange juice. But some units have had more work and costs applied to them than in other cases. It wouldn't make sense to treat the oranges that just barely started in a period as the same as oranges that went through the entire department from start to finish. Thus, we introduce the concept of an equivalent unit of production. The equivalent units of production are the number of units that could have been started and completed given the amount of costs incurred in that period. The equivalent units of production are very easy to calculate. Let's say we are focusing on ending work in process inventory. If there are 1,000 units left over in ending inventory, but they are only 10% complete, it wouldn't make sense to count them as 1,000 complete units. Instead, we take 10% of 1,000, that is 0.1 times 1,000, to get the equivalent units completed from ending work in process inventory, 100 units. Equivalent unit calculations are often different for direct materials and conversion costs, which include direct labor and factory overhead. Oftentimes, direct materials are all added at one point in the process, typically at the beginning. This should make sense. Consider our example with the oranges in the juice extraction process. We can't really start the juice extraction process until the direct materials, the oranges, are added. So all of the direct materials would be added at the beginning of the juice extraction process. Conversion costs, on the other hand, are typically added equally throughout the process. There are a few more details as to exactly how to calculate the total equivalent units of production and how the calculation differs for the two primary process costing methods, weighted average and FIFO, but we will focus on those details in the next two videos. For now, just remember that not all units are treated equally, because some units are further along in the production process than others, and the equivalent units of production calculation helps us to adjust for those differences. Alright, that's all I have to say in this video. In the next video, we will dive into the process cost summary report using the weighted average method.